Immanuel Kant was an Enlightenment era philosopher. Lived between 1724 and 1804. We generally call him a German philosopher, and in fact, he wrote in German, so I think that's appropriate. He was actually born in the country of Prussia, that is, Prussia with a P, in the town of Königsberg, where he would actually live spend almost his entire life there. He studied at the University of Königsberg, later became a professor there, and really only left a couple of times in his whole life. Um, like some of the other philosophers that we've looked at, Immanuel Kant is a really interesting figure, and I don't just mean his philosophy, which is, of course, not only interesting, but incredibly important and influential. Um, but just as a human being, it's sort of a number of eccentricities. One of these, and this is, I'll limit myself here because there are lots and lots of stories. One of his peculiarities was that he believed very strongly in the connection between um, great critical thinking and walking. So he walked uh, all day, every day. Um, his neighbors were said to set their clock by when they saw Kant leave his home, and he would walk 8 times up and down his street. But even when he was working in his study, he was walking around. Many of you probably uh, seen these standing desks. Maybe some of you use a standing desk. I can't imagine why anyone would choose that instead of sitting. But Immanuel Kant, his study was laid out in such a way that he essentially had two of these on opposite sides of a pretty large room there. And one might be open with a book from which he's reading, and another may be open to a notebook into which he is writing. And he would spend much of his day, uh, poring over one book and then walking around as he contemplates, and then walking over to the other desk there and writing his notes. And he would spend sometimes whole days this way. Well, I won't bore you with all of these crazy stories about Immanuel Kant, but if you're interested in knowing more about him personally, you might Google him. There's a lot of great stories out there. Or if you are, really ambitious and a great reader, this is a long book, but this was written by a former professor of mine, Dr. Manfred Hewen, formerly of Purdue University, where I did my PhD work. I also am such a fan of Kant that in 2016 I published this little book here about Kant, about his critique of pure reason. This long and notable book. Well, let's talk a little bit more about Kant's philosophy. After all, that's why we're here. 1 second here. Thank you. Just needed to adjust the slide. Let me do this again. 1 second. All right. I apologize for the jump cuts there. So Kant was primarily a rationalist. Of course, a rationalist would be someone who does their philosophy largely by thinking, as opposed to, say, an empiricist who does their philosophy largely by observing the natural world, or through study, or through research. Kant famously tells us two things fill the mind with ever increasing wonder and awe, the more often and the more intensely the mind of thought is drawn to them: the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me. We call Kant's ethics deontological ethics. Um, as you've probably found at this point. We in philosophy, and I think in particular ethicists, are fond of our lingo, our terminology here. But please don't be intimidated. The word deontological has a very simple meaning. It simply means having to do with duty. It's called deontological ethics because Kant's philosophy involved around trying to figure out what is our moral duty and doing that thing. And how do we come to know what is our moral duty? Well, we're going to spend a chunk of this video trying to answer just that question. But for Kant, it's our will, it's our intentions, it's our duty that make an action right or wrong, good or bad, not say the action's consequences, or whether we are virtuous, as Aristotle would say, or that we do it with the spirit of caring, as Nell Noddings would say. For Kant, it is our duty, our will, our intent. He writes, nothing can possibly be conceived in the world or even out of it which can be called good without qualification, except a good will. The central concept of Kant's moral theory is the categorical imperative. I want to talk about the categorical imperative, but before we do, let's just talk about the words, the categorical and imperative. You might remember the term imperative from your high school English class. I did not, but an imperative is simply a command. And we could have a hypothetical imperative. A hypothetical imperative would be one that is context dependent and that only applies to some people some of the time. Here's an example. If you want to lose weight, eat more vegetables. There's a command there, eat more vegetables. But notice that it doesn't apply to everyone. I certainly ought to eat more vegetables, but maybe other people are doing fine. It's not a command that is universal. For Kant, though, there is one rule that we must always follow. There is one command, one imperative, which is categorical in nature. It's absolute and universal. I think one of the most confusing aspects of Kant's moral philosophy for introductory level students or who are just getting their feet wet in Kant scholarship is this idea. And so I'm going to say it a couple of times. There is one categorical imperative. There is one moral rule, moral imperative for us to follow. But we can express it in three different ways, in three different formulations. These are not three different rules. According to Kant, he insists these are not three different rules. These are different formulations, different expressions of the one same moral rule, the one categorical imperative. We're going to look at least two of these formulations in this video. We won't concern ourselves with the third formulation at this point. So the first formulation of the categorical imperative, again, the first way of expressing it, expressing this one rule. Kant says, always act so that you may also wish that the maxim of your action become a universal law. But what in the world does that mean? Well, I think what he's saying is that anytime we need to act, anytime we need to make a moral decision, we should act in the way that we would want everyone to act in that situation. We ought to do what we would prescribe for everyone to do. So this is to ask every time we act if we can reasonably and without wanting to contradict that everyone acts the same way. Let me talk a little bit about the second formulation here, and then we'll talk a little bit more about each of them in our subsequent videos. So the second formulation, again, not another rule. Kant insists there is one categorical imperative, but here is a second way of expressing it. Think of it as another side to the same coin. Act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of another, always as an end in themselves, never as a means only. I've added a couple of words there to this translation. Act so that you treat humanity, whether that's yourself or another person, always as an end in themselves, never as a means only. Well, what's he saying here? Essentially, I think he's saying don't use people, right? Now, you might say, well, that's impossible. Our society is set up so that we need to use people. If I go into a restaurant to order, get something to eat, I've got to use the waiter to place my order. I've got to use the cook to cook it up for me. They're using me to make a profit. I go into a store and I'm using the clerk there to buy what I want. Okay, fine. However, let's never forget, Kant says, that the waiter, the chef there, the clerk, me, that we are all unique and important individuals. Let us never forget that we must be treated with respect and dignity because we are an end in ourself. More to come.